Welcome back to Around the Table, the podcast of the Hero Roundtable with me, Matt Langdon. This week we have a returning guest to the show, Suzanne Bernier. She's also been on many a Hero Roundtable stage. She was at the Raptors celebration in downtown Toronto a couple of weekends ago and found herself in a situation that she had imagined before, or similar situations had been imagined before, and really makes a living telling people how to prepare for such situations. But having been in one for the first time, she was made aware of things she hadn't thought about, actions that she assumed people would never do, and so on. So I'm really thrilled to be able to bring this interview to you. I was sort of chatting with Suzanne right after it happened, on her way home, and she was processing through what she'd just seen. And a few days later, I said, "Do you want to really talk that out?" And so I was thrilled that she did, and I'll present it to you now. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, a week and a half ago, you were in downtown Toronto celebrating the Raptors wrapping up the NBA championship for the parade and celebration and whatnot. And then something happened. So I'm going to let you take over from there and just sort of tell the story, and we'll talk about why we're talking about that story.
Sure. Last Monday, I, like many other people, apparently almost 2 million people, gathered in the middle of downtown Toronto to celebrate the Raptors' historic win of the first time ever a Canadian team winning the NBA championship. And of course, it was a really great mood. And at the beginning of the day, when I went into the center of the area where the rally was going to happen and where the parade was ending, you couldn't really move very much, but it was a really festive mood at the beginning. And then I started noticing, and it was really about 15 minutes before the incident itself happened, but I started kind of being more aware of people that might be at risk and vulnerable in that type of a situation, even though there wasn't anything bad going on at the time. But I just remember noticing specifically a few young parents with baby strollers with young children in the strollers and trying to maneuver them through the crowds. And it was tough enough for myself to maneuver myself through the crowd, let alone I was thinking of and noticing. And there was a couple beside me that we started talking about that, actually thinking, wow, maybe this isn't the best decision to bring your small children into that kind of a situation. And then I also remember noticing an older woman who was, I wouldn't say disabled, but took her a while to get around, and she had a walker. And I again noted and thought, I hope she's not alone, because there's no way she can maneuver herself through this crowd if things get crazy. And then I also thought, okay, I should also maneuver myself in an area. I mean, I wanted to be there part of the celebration, and I still don't regret being there part of it. It's just that what happened afterwards was an unfortunate situation for several people. And I don't know if you wanted me to kind of enter into what happened.
Yeah, so what happened that changed things?
Yeah, and it was in the middle of the afternoon, and what happened was, I guess, there was a lot of different things that happened. The parade was supposed to start on time and then wind its way through downtown Toronto. And then about an hour and a half later, it was supposed to end with this big rally. Well, 5 hours later, they, I'm sure, never expected 2 million people to be blocking the parade route. And not blocking on purpose, but I mean, if you put that many people in such a tight space, that's what ended up happening. So there was a lot of challenges. And it was hot, which was great. We were all loving the great summer weather finally that came here. However, there were a lot of people perhaps on edge, had been there for a long time. There were some people that were fainting because of heat exhaustion. They hadn't planned to be there, waiting for so long. And then, being hours and hours into it with no water, that kind of thing. So preparation is key as well, right? If you're going to put yourself into those types of situations, be prepared that things might not very well go as planned, and there may very well be delays, as there usually are in parades and those kinds of mass gatherings. And be prepared. And do you have access to water? And are you able to remove yourself quickly from wherever you are at that time and anybody you're with before if something happens? So what happened was right about 10 or 15 minutes after I had noticed specifically those people who were vulnerable and that the crowd was getting very, very loud and boisterous, I guess. And then all of a sudden, people were letting off fireworks as well through the crowd. So it was, and they started sounding like shots fired. But then after a while, you're seeing fireworks. It's the middle of the day. And so you're just expecting, well, that's what it is. Well, at one point, fireworks went off. And I assumed they were fireworks, but they were shots fired in the crowd. It wasn't an active intruder incident per se, like a lot of them would be, what I think that a lot of people in the crowd thought it was at the time, but I believe it was a targeted shooting. We're still, the facts are still unclear about what happened, but that's what I believe it was. Anyway, as a result of that, of course, the crowd now, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people in just one area where it happened in this one block. I happened to be in that one block where it happened. So shots fired, but I didn't know they were shots at the time. Just thought maybe they were fireworks or whatever. Then what I heard was the rumbling of the crowd coming, running away from the sounds of the shots. And that was the most deafening, craziest sound ever. And that's really what kind of woke me up to say, you better start running, because I hear this thunder and roar, and you could kind of feel it on the ground, right? Thousands of people running towards you in the cement. And so I looked up, and I'm a small, short person, as a lot of us know. So looking at that, to me, all I can describe it as was a tsunami of people. And right away I thought, what's happening with those babies and those strollers and that woman that I noticed, because I could barely, I was running for my life from this crowd of people who were running for their lives as well. And so that's the first thing that came to mind.
So let's pause there for a minute. So
sure.
I've heard from a few reports about that rumble too, that other people reported that's what woke them up to the fact that there was something serious happening. For people that don't know you, that are watching this randomly on YouTube or whatnot, you've been to a lot of Hero Roundtables, but what's your background? You've written this book, but your background, because I think that's going to be important to know for these next pieces of the story.
Yes. My background is I'm an emergency management specialist, a crisis management consultant. I work with governments and communities and companies to help them plan for, respond to, and recover from disasters. And specifically over the past few years, my work, a lot of it has been with active shooter survivors or people who've been impacted by terrorist or active shooting or those kinds of incidents. So for the last few years, I've been talking to a lot of people who've gone through much worse situations than that, but still that kind of a scenario. And one of the things I do is I work with companies and communities to help them be trained on how to be able to respond, to react and respond and recover from that kind of an incident. And so being able to be involved in it and now seeing it from that perspective, from the inside, I think was a blessing. Really, I really think I was fortunate to be able to be in the field and be able to witness what I witness now inside, to be able to validate some of the things that we preach when we train people, but then also to notice, okay, well, maybe some things need to be tweaked a bit, because now I see how people really respond and react.
Right.
And also just kind of, okay, now I also maybe can use this as a reminder for people within the industry on what we should be focusing on, because now I kind of see what people's real reactions are.
Yeah. Okay, so a human tsunami is coming towards you and you've started running.
Right.
then
I
what?
start running. And so for those who don't know me, I'm less than 5 feet tall. And most people in Toronto and other parts of the world are taller than that. So my perspective is a little bit more like a child's perspective, really. And I guess that's also why I was thinking about the children, because I was thinking at my height, I was already worried about being trampled over. And the other thing I thought of was the obstacles that these strollers ended up being to everybody who was trying to get away. And that was something I never would have thought of at all, except if I were involved in it. And then running away from it and seeing strollers kind of flying in the air. And that's exactly what happened, was there were strollers literally being tossed in the air. And I'm hoping that it was because people were, and I've heard stories of this were great stories, and I witnessed some of everyday people stepping up, right? I heard stories of people covering up, sheltering children who were on the ground who wouldn't have had time to run away. And the mother yelling, "Somebody help my children." And I can't keep track of them. And people huddling over to be able to prevent people from stomping on them as they were going through. So some really great observations, but also other ones where I thought, I think that there are better ways perhaps that we should be thinking about and preparing ourselves and our families when we know we're going out into large scale events and I'm not saying we should be thinking that there's going to be shootings everywhere we go, but we should really be aware of the situations and also be aware of who we're bringing in with us to those situations, and think twice about potentially bringing in vulnerable people, whether that means elderly people or those who might not have the same types of physical abilities to be able to escape from something quickly, as well as small children, obviously, that, you're taking a chance. So be a hero to your family before you're going out there. And just know what your surroundings might be like.
I guess you can, if you are taking someone who would need help in a stampede or in a quick evacuation, it makes sense to think about it, like you're saying, but maybe it's having a very explicit plan of who's carrying this person if we need to leave quickly, and not leaving it up to chance, but really talk through it and say, right, if something happens where we need to leave quickly, you are responsible for child A, you are responsible for grandma. That's the kind of thing that we know it helps in emergency situations, is having those explicit plans beforehand, right?
Right, yeah. And like you said, talking it through beforehand so everybody knows.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to think about it at the last minute when something's happening. Oh, what did we say again? But if you've talked it through, you're going to be likely to remember, okay, I'm looking for and responsible for. You're right. And then the other thing that I noticed that happened, and we've heard of this before too, right? I'm sure that you've heard of it, and with those situations where there's usually a second wave. And I didn't really think about that until the second wave hit. And so what I observed with that, and what happened with the second wave, so the first wave was when the shots were fired and people were running away. And so then I ducked under a family's legs to the side sort of until the first stampede went by. And then things seemed kind of almost awkwardly peaceful, where all of a sudden the stampede had gone. And so I kind of like crawl out. And then it seemed, there's police officers running towards the shots. And there's police officers on bikes riding towards the shots. But everybody's cleared the way now. And I'm thinking, oh, good. I'm taking the time to charge my phone, thinking that, just in case, make sure that my phone's charged, because it was almost dead. That's another note for people, to make sure that your phone's always charged. So I start charging my phone. And then all of a sudden, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, man, I'm so glad that, I got out of that one. And, thinking, processing it. And then, it would be maybe about 5 minutes after I saw the police run by, charge my phone. All of a sudden, I hear that same rumble. And right away, now I know. I turn, I see a stampede coming again. And now I hear people yelling. I hear one girl specifically, and I see her, and she's panicking, and she's yelling out, "He's got a gun. He's got a gun." So, but what happened, why that second wave happened was a miscommunication, as we all, and I teach this in crisis communications, there's always going to be miscommunication in these types of events, right? When they're so fast acting and people don't know and there's so many people. What happened was, and I found this out afterwards, right? After I had to run away from that stampede, duck into a store, and then there was a third stampede in the store. But anyway, this second stampede was caused because the police had taken down the shooter. And then I guess somebody had said, he's got a gun. And then everybody thought, okay, there's another shooting happening.
Yep.
And so that's the second wave. So my lesson to myself and to everybody else is to, if you're ever caught in that situation, get out before the second wave hits. Get off of that street or that area. I stayed on the same street, not in the same area. I was walking down and I was a couple blocks away, but didn't matter.
Yep.
By then, that it was still going on and people were still frantic. So that's my experience on that second wave piece.
So did you respond differently to the second wave as you did on the first wave?
Well, the second wave, a little bit, because I had a bit more time, because I had a bit more time to recognize and I'll never forget that sound. And I'm sure anybody who's heard that sound before, just like any kind of, event like that, right? You'll remember it all the time. But so I had a little bit more reaction time because of it. My battery, though, flew right out of, because I was shoved kind of inside the crowd and that flew. But I held onto my phone, so I still had that. My reaction time was quicker. But now, because I was going into an enclosed area, then I went into my training mode, which was, okay, now I'm going into an enclosed area, plan for active intruder incident. So I went directly to an aisle and went into like a cabinet and like hid inside there where no one would have been able to see me. And then when we were moved to another area, found another area that had like these big suitcases and hid. So I was kind of looking for and doing all of the kinds of things that I've been trained to do and train others to do, right? But one of the things I did notice was most others did not think to do that at all. And I was quite taken aback by that, how people who thought they were hiding in a lockdown situation, and we were, like the police had announced it was a lockdown situation, but how people didn't know what to do and didn't know how to hide.
So you were in a department store? Is that what you did? You ran into a store and then that got locked down,
right?
Just over loudspeakers.
And then what happened? Yeah, and then there was, so the first thing was people didn't seem to know what to do. Fortunately, the employees in the store were fantastic. And they did what I think any would do, right? I mean, they just stepped up. They were just people helping people. They weren't Canadian Tire employees, that's the store. They were just people. And I did take note of that as well. There were people checking in on, there was one woman who was having a stress attack. And one of the employees knelt down beside her and started trying to give her breathing exercises. And, I saw a lot of great stuff happen, but I also saw a lot of other things that happen in that kind of event, right? So the other miscommunication that happened that caused the third stampede was in the store. Now, they're getting mixed messages, as we always do in that kind of situation, right? So at first they're saying, oh, well, we might be evacuating, so we're all going to go downstairs first and then wait for directions. So they make us all go downstairs. And then we had to go back upstairs. But anyway, at the time when we're all evacuating downstairs, somebody says in the crowd, the shooter's inside the store. I knew they weren't. And, logical-minded people would know, right? I just heard the announcement from the police, no threat in the building, but to ensure everybody's safety, we're locking down the building. We will let you know, right? So what I was doing was, like most people should do, like anybody should do if you can, is find a hiding spot just in case there's still a threat until you're told to be safe, right? Anyway, so yeah, somebody started the rumor that there was a shooter in the store. All of a sudden, I'm filing through the main aisle. I hear that same rumbling again. I look, I see people screaming, and they're heading towards, I don't know what they were heading towards. They were just heading away from whoever said that there was a shooter in the store. So that was the third situation. Then I dove into an aisle. But that's another thing was I noticed that a lot of people just seemed to follow that leader who was running into nowhere. I don't know where they intended they were to go, but everybody was kind of following them instead of doing what I kind of did, which was duck out of the way,
Yeah.
so that you're avoiding yourself, being trampled, and that just, anyway, making yourself less vulnerable. But that's one of the things that I did notice, is that people just tend to seem to just, if they don't know any better,
Yeah.
they're just going to follow whoever they see doing whatever they're doing, instead of thinking themselves, okay, as a person, as an individual, I should be doing this for my safety.
And that's what training is for in any of these sorts of things, whether it's emergency response or the heroism training that we do. It's combating that primal instinct or primal urge to do what today seems to be the crazy thing, right? The thoughtless thing. But in millennia past, that's what you had to do. You had to run as quickly as you could away from the threat, and that's what would let you survive as an individual. But we never had so many people in one small space before, right? So the stampedes weren't a thing to worry about. So you got into an aisle, you got safe again, you're hiding again, and then you got the all clear.
Yeah, we got the all clear. I'd say, I don't know, we were in there for at least a good hour before we were evacuated. And then they ended up, it wasn't even all clear, we're evacuating the entire complex, which is if you know downtown Toronto at all, it's the Eaton Centre, which is the main downtown mall complex. So this store was a part of that mall, but they had to evacuate the entire complex. Because there were a couple of other incidents that were not, it's a big city with a lot of people. So there were a couple of other incidents that happened nearby too. So they decided for everybody's safety to evacuate. And they had evacuated a lot of and shut down some of the subway stations because of overcrowding. So a lot of things that they did well as far as making sure that they avoided other potential crisis situations, right? And I don't know, and now I think that the city officials are getting criticized for, did they not plan for that amount but how can you really plan for that type of an event? You don't know for sure how many will show up, and, it's supposed to be a joyous occasion, and how can you know? But it really is, I think, there's of course a responsibility from local planners and government to make sure that they're trying to organize these things in as safe a way as possible. But we also, as individuals, because that's what I really took note of, is that making sure that if we're bringing our loved ones into those types of situations, that we can, like you said, be able to identify who is responsible for making sure that they're safe if you have to get out or something bad is happening.
Yeah. So I know one thing, when we take our kid to Europe, especially with public transport and just large cities and large crowds, we talk through what to do if one of us doesn't get on the train, or one gets off accidentally at the wrong place or whatever, and talk through all the permutations of that, so that when it happens, it's just obvious what we both do. There's no guessing. There's no, well, what if she got off at the next one and it's just waiting there, or so that's a big factor in your success rate in these emergencies. But what kind of mechanisms are there in place for the average person to know that they should duck into an aisle when people are sprinting in en masse through a shop? How would they know that other than seeing Jason Bourne do that in a movie or something? Like there are those things that sometimes are overtly explained to us in stories, when movies or TVs or books, but what are we doing to help people prepare for these things?
Well, we should be doing a lot more. And I think that we will be doing a lot more now that we're seeing a lot more of these types of incidents happen. And I am seeing it more in businesses, at least, where even 2 years ago, most businesses, even though they knew and were aware of a lot of these types of incidents happening, they still weren't really prepared to run drills
Yeah.
and talk about it and do exercises and stuff in the workplace. Now they're recognizing that they need to do that. And in a way, people are also recognizing organizationally that they need to roll this up into their occupational health and safety program and procedures. So it's great that we're seeing that now in businesses, but how do you train the average family or the average individual who does not have that opportunity to have that? But one of the things that I would encourage people to do is, if you do work in a workplace or any kind of an organization that you're involved in, ask them about, one, what kind of plans they have in place should that kind of an incident happen, and whether or not it might be of value to run a drill. And it doesn't even have to be, I mean, some companies are against drills, physical drills, let's say, but even just walking through or having a training where, having a training for an hour and somebody runs through the run, hide, fight video, or run, hide, whatever it is, depending on the country, the terminology is different. But running a training session, a lunch and learn session with staff about running that video, and even that video alone is pretty educational as far as letting people know what kinds of things to think about, right? So even that, just tossing on that video once to staff. And then also, if you're somebody watching this now, go to work and ask them, encourage your workplace or your organization to do that. And to do even more, if you can, run exercises. If you're not familiar with it, there's people out there that can come in and do that for you. But it's something that I think that, unfortunately, we're going to see more of, and we are seeing more of. And it's just one of those things that, now that we're seeing more risks associated, we have to do more planning on how we're going to respond and recover from that. That's the thing, too, is with these kinds of incidents, it's a lot different than recovering from a natural disaster where you have the whole community who's affected and impacted, where with these kinds of events, they're very isolated, and it's a very different kind of trauma to get over. And it can take years, and if not a lifetime, to be able to get over this kind of an attack, when it's on a large scale.
Yeah. Well, I think going back to the drills, it's if you talk to anyone about drills, they've got a negative opinion of them. Whether it's a business owner, a person who's working in the business, nobody likes them, right? Or schools as well. Yeah. Nobody wants to run them. Nobody enjoys running them. So I wonder if the trick there is actually telling some stories, using storytelling to tell stories of when these skills have come in handy, right? It's if you explain why it could be important to do a drill, what the actual outcome could be, the difference that you could make, maybe then people would get on board to participate. Because at the moment, that's exactly what it is, right? It's just nobody wants to do it, so they don't pay attention, they screw around, they're just that's what these things are.
Yeah. And that's always the biggest challenge in our industry, is that people see things like this happening every day, but they still, until it happens to them or their community,
I think
they're not
that's
really willing to think, oh, this is really serious, we better get trained in it.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between saying to the staff or the whoever, this is really serious, you have to do it. There's a difference there to saying, let me tell you a story, and people remember. I mean, we know the science of storytelling. So, but it's all time, isn't it? Businesses don't want to give time to you to go in and train, and schools haven't got time to run this stuff and get kids on board and teachers on board. That's always the battle, is time.
Right. And I guess the best argument against that we try to give to companies is, but the little time that you're wasting, which is never a waste, of course, when we're training, as you know, but the little time devoted to that could end up meaning the loss of your whole business or credibility should something happen and go wrong, and then it's found out afterwards that you weren't prepared and didn't do your due diligence in protecting safety of your workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, we might leave it there unless you've got any other words of wisdom. I think you've given some good examples and tips. Anything else, people, that you want to impart to people about your experience?
Yeah, I think that in the end, I would say I don't want to discourage anyone from attending large scale events and celebrations. And I think that's something definitely that we shouldn't do. But we do need to just remind people of thinking about and being thoughtful in their planning when they're going to put themselves in these types of large events and who they're bringing with them and all of the stuff that we talked about earlier. That just to me was just a huge takeaway. What was that? And that also think about what you might be bringing into an area that then if something like that happens might be a challenge and a barrier for people to then get escape from, like strollers and those types of things. And that's another thing that we'll end this is always listen to authorities because they do know what they're talking about. And the authorities had said and warned people before getting into that large space, no strollers, don't bring a stroller. People did anyway. So it wasn't like the police hadn't planned for that and told people against and warned them again. They'd warned them against that, and there were signs saying that. So just a reminder to people that there's a reason why our public safety officials and our first responders tell people to stay away from certain areas or to do certain things. And again, the panic that erupted in the store. If people would have listened to and believed the announcement that the police were saying that the store was safe, then that could have avoided, that extra stampede that happened as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is thinking about what you might be bringing that might be an impediment to quick escape is what are you bringing in case a 2-hour parade goes for 5 hours?
Right.
Or 12 hours, or, if you're making sure that if you're leaving the house to go to a thing where anything could go wrong, that you've got what you need, medication or water or whatever it might be, phone chargers.
Yeah, a couple of them.
A two, yeah. All right, well, Suzanne, thank you very much. I think it'd be great if you could put this together for a talk for Hero Roundtable Michigan. Really, put together the story and the tips. I think that'd be a really good talk.
Done.
Cool. All right, well, thank you again, and we'll see you. Well, before you go, how can people reach out to you if they've got more questions about preparing and or getting you into their business or whatever it might be?
Sure. They can just go to my website, which is myname.com, SuzanneBernier.com, and you can find, all different things about me in there, as well as how to reach me. There's a contact page there.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Bye.